and welcome to today's webinar, Chat-GPT for Accountants. I'm delighted to say that we have had over 800 registrations for this webinar, which is enormous, the record number of registrations we've ever had for any webinar, and clearly there is a lot of interest in this particular topic. If truth be told, we have run the webinar already and I am now re-recording the webinar. There was just a few things that I wasn't happy with in the recording. My name is Greg Einfeld. I am the founder of Lime Actuarial and I am going to be your host today. And as for Lime Actuarial, well, we've been at the forefront of technological advancement in the SMSF industry for 10 years, starting with when we launched, and that was 10 years ago, providing instantaneous SMSF actuarial certificates from the very day that we launched, and we've only continued to improve our technology and our use of technology ever since. And when it comes to Chat-GPT and AI, that's no exception. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share with you some of our knowledge and our learnings in this particular field, and hopefully you will all find that helpful in your businesses and maybe even in your personal lives as well. I'm going to start off by posing this question. Will Chat-GPT replace accountants? And in my very strong view, no, you can all breathe easy. Chat-GPT will not replace accountants, and nor will AI. However, accountants that use Chat-GPT and AI will replace those that don't. And if you don't believe me, let's look at some technology examples from the past. Accountants who use calculators have replaced accountants who don't use calculators. Try and show me a single accountant that doesn't use a calculator anymore. Similarly, accountants who use Excel have replaced accountants that don't. And what we're seeing now is that accountants who use cloud accounting software such as Xero and Class Super and BGL 360 are replacing those accountants who don't. And that is going to be the same when it comes to AI and Chat-GPT. Let's look at how some industry leaders in other industries, and in particular in the technology industry, are using AI. So this is an article that appeared a couple of weeks ago in the Financial Review. They start off by saying it's adapt or die when it comes to AI. Then if we go a little bit further down, they say starting bit by bit, so start small and build up from there, like with everything. Here we have a quote from the founder, one of the founders of Canva, Cliff Obrecht, and he says that he uses AI to automate mundane tasks, and we're going to talk about that today. But then we take another look at Richard White. He's the CEO and founder of WiseTech, and he talks about giving an update using AI in Mandarin. And that was to his shareholders. And he said he could have done the same thing in French or German as well. And I'm sure that over time that will extend to just about any language that you can name. So that's just a few ideas on how different people are using Chat-GPT and AI. This chart shows the time it took for various technologies to reach 1 million users. And if we start with Netflix on the left of the page, it took 3.5 years. As we move across the page, the time got faster and faster, and the adoption was quicker. All the way down to the iPhone, it took 74 days before there were 1 million adopters of the iPhone. And with Chat-GPT, it only took 5 days. So the adoption has been much, much more rapid than with any technology in the past. And that's a pretty clear indication that it won't be long before everybody is using it on a regular basis. Now I want to give you one warning, and I'd like you to meet this gentleman here, Stephen Schwartz. He is an experienced lawyer in the United States, and his client was on a flight, and allegedly there was a runaway food trolley on the flight that bashed into his client's leg and caused some injury. And so the client sued the airline, and they chose Stephen Schwartz as their legal counsel. And so he wanted to research other law cases to support his arguments, and he conducted that research using Chat-GPT, and he presented those cases in court. And it turns out that those cases were fictitious. They didn't actually exist. Of course, he lost the case and he had egg on his face. And when asked how was he sure that those cases existed, he said, well, I asked Chat-GPT whether they existed or not, and Chat-GPT told me that they were real cases. So the moral of this story is, whenever you use any form of AI, you just need to run some sanity checks over the result, just to check they look reasonable. Don't fall into the same trap that Stephen Schwartz fell into. Another warning is around data privacy. You should assume, if you're using any generative AI tools, that it is going to take your data and use it to train its own models. I'm not saying that you will lose the confidentiality of your data or your clients, but it's a possibility, and so you should just keep that in mind. If possible, try and anonymize any of your data. So instead of listing the name of your customer, just give them an identifier, maybe a letter of the alphabet or a number, and that way you won't be sharing any confidential information that can be traced back to individuals. Now, in today's webinar, I'm going to be running live AI queries, and what that means is not everything is going to go exactly the way I want it to or according to plan, and that's the way that generative AI works. Every time you type in a query, you'll get a slightly different response. So I'm just going to need to manage my way through that, and hopefully you'll be understanding of that as well. I'm going to go through at a fairly fast pace, and when I ran the webinar, there were, as you would expect, some questions at the end, and I'll try and cover a couple of the points that were raised in those questions. So, I've introduced you already to Stephen Schwartz. Now I'm going to introduce you to a platform called Poe. And Poe is a tool, a website that you can use that gives you access to dozens of different AI tools. So let's have a look at Poe. This is what it looks like. And here's a couple of examples. There's GPT-4, which is the most current version of Chat-GPT. There's Claude 3 Opus. That's another really good generative AI tool that I like to use. And there's lots and lots of other tools and bots that you can use in here as well. Poe is a subscription-based service. You have to pay $300 Australian a year for a subscription, which is similar to the cost of purchasing a GPT-4 subscription. And I prefer Poe because it gives you not only GPT-4, but it gives you a whole lot of other options as well. So the URL there is poe.com. So what we're going to do now, I've prepared a whole lot of queries, and I'll type the first one in just so you can see how it works, and then after that I'm going to copy the queries across from my document that I've already prepared. That'll just save us a bit of time. So we're going to start off with a brainstorm. Please list 10 use cases for Chat-GPT relevant for accountants. So Chat-GPT is really good for brainstorming, and here you can see we've got 10 different ideas. If I would have asked for 20, I would have got more. And And so it's a great place to start, whether you're brainstorming for your accounting business or maybe even brainstorming ideas for your children's parties or anything else in between. It's a great brainstorming tool. What we need to do though next is to dig deeper and dive into one of these. So I'm going to take, let's say this one here, tax planning and compliance. So I want to dive deeper and I'm going to say, tell me more about how Chat-GPT can help with tax planning and compliance. And so now the robot is going to go into even more detail on that particular topic. And then, so we've got 10 different sub-points here, and I could dig deeper into any of those if I wanted to. So it's always good to start with a brainstorm with a fairly open question and then dig deeper and deeper and deeper and provide more instructions. And you'll see me doing more of this today as we go on. So lots of different use cases there. Now I'm going to run through a number of use cases, not necessarily the same ones that you just saw, but a number of use cases nonetheless, all relevant to accountants. We're going to start off with processing some invoices. Now I've prepared a file here. This is a file with some invoices that have been issued to my business. You'll see this one here says paid, for example. And we're going to ask, we've written here, this file contains some invoices. Please create a table which summarizes the invoices, and we're telling the bot which columns we want. Now, I'm going to use the Claude 3 Opus bot for this. So I put in the instruction, I upload the file, which is called Combined Invoices, and I click on this Enter button. And so now the Claude robot is going away and extracting this information from those invoices. The supplier, the amount of the invoice, you'll see some of them are in US dollars, some of them Australian dollars. It's clever enough to pick that up. And the due date. I'm going to ask a more challenging question now, which is please create a second table with an additional column for the amount owing. We'll see what it comes up with. So it hasn't really done that very well, and this is where I say you do need to run a spot check or two. So I'm going to ask it to check the last column based on whether each invoice has been paid. So now they're coming back with the revised table, and this time they're picking up whether the invoice has been paid or not, and it's identified that most of them have been paid, but that first one hasn't been paid. And it's then giving us some commentary on how it's come up with all of this information. So this Digital River one, the invoice doesn't mention any payment status, so the full amount is considered owing, whereas the next one, the invoice status is marked as paid, so no amount is owing. So there's even a bit of an audit trail there, so we can see how it came up with its results. Let's move on. What we're going to do now is we're going to try and analyze some financial statements, and we'll start with this company WiseTech. You'll remember I gave you a quote a few minutes ago from Richard White. He's the CEO of WiseTech. And we want to analyze these financial statements. Now I'm putting in a Dropbox link the financial report, the annual report, is quite a long document. I'm putting in a Dropbox link, and let's see how we go analysing these financial statements, because we want to make sure that Claude is able to interpret the Dropbox link. And it says that it can't access the Dropbox link. That's a shame. What I'll try to do instead is I'm going to try and upload the PDF document. So let's see how that goes. Just taking a little bit of time. Okay, so this time, based on the PDF document, you'll see I didn't have to give it any more instructions. I just gave it the document and it knew what to do already. It knew from the previous question that I wanted it to analyse the statements. And I gave a very, very broad, generic question here. Please analyse the financial statements and have a look at what it's done. It's summarised everything into about 10 or less bullet points, and it's told us the number of team members, some information about revenue growth, and investment, EBITDA, and how much the EBITDA and the NPAT have increased. So it really has touched on the very, very key metrics that we've been interested in. It said continued strong revenue growth. So it knows that the revenue growth has been strong in previous years. And so I think that's a pretty good summary. And now I'm going to ask, what is the outlook for WiseTech? So now I'm asking it to move away from the facts and to make some perhaps predictions. Let's see what it comes up with. The outlook appears positive. We had revenue growth of 25 to 33%. Sees substantial future growth opportunities across its 6 key development priority areas. It's well positioned to continue delivering strong top-line growth at scale. So overall, that's a pretty healthy scorecard, I would say. And so Claude has been able to interpret the results, the financial results, and provide an outlook. I'm very, very impressed with what we've seen there. So now I'm going to turn to another company. This is a company called OpenPay. I'll try the Dropbox link again. Uploading annual report for OpenPay. Please analyse the financial statements. The file you provided is an image. Okay, that's not very good. Okay, so I clearly uploaded the incorrect file there. So let's just stick with the results we've got from WiseTech. But what you can see is that Claude is really good at taking this document and interpreting it and providing the outlook. So as I said, I'm very, very impressed with what it's been able to do there. Let's move on to Bitcoin and seasonality. So what I'm interested in here is seasonality in returns of investing in Bitcoin. So I'm uploading historical Bitcoin prices. I'm not going to give it the Dropbox link there. I'll put in a file which contains prices, historical prices. I'm not asking for prices, I'm asking for returns. So Claude is going to need to work out how do you convert prices into returns, and what does seasonality mean, and what would that look like? And here you go. It's come up with the average return for each month. So I'm assuming here that 1 is January, 2 is February, and so on. And you can see that we've had some months with really positive returns, and we've got these observations, January, February, April, and so on. Returns are above 20%. August and September on average have had negative returns. Based on this, there does appear to be some seasonality. However, it's important to note that this is based on limited historical data. Past performance does not guarantee future results. So it's talking just like a human would, and it's making all of the disclaimers that you would expect any investment analyst to make when they are performing this type of analysis. So once again, I think that is really impressive there. The next use case we're going to look at is some lists and extracting data from the lists. Now I've prepared a file here. It looks like this. So we've got 4 clients named Michael, Jane, Simon and Zoe, and they each own different shares in their portfolio, and we're going to ask some questions to interrogate who owns which shares from this file. You can see the list there. So the table shows a list of shares owned by 4 people. Which shares are owned by both Michael and Jane? And I'm just going to upload the file. Here we go. You'll notice this is a PDF file. So Claude has to do optical character recognition to extract this data. And you can see there, it's talking us through its thought process. Which shares does Michael own? Which shares does Jane own? Comparing the 2 lists. Which shares appear in both lists? And the conclusion. So that's a pretty good, logical and accurate response. And now we might ask a different question. List everyone who owns ANZ shares. And this is really helpful if perhaps ANZ was conducting a share buyback and your clients want some advice on whether they should be participating in the share buyback or not, and you've got a table listing all your clients and who owns which shares, so you can really quickly extract which clients own ANZ, and then you can send an email to those clients advising them on whether or not to participate in this opportunity. So the conclusion is that Michael, Simon and Zoe all own shares in ANZ, so we're going to recommend a particular course of action just to those clients, but we don't want to send that email to Jane because it's just not relevant to her. Now we're just going to ask about some historical share prices. We might need to do this for capital gains tax purposes. For example, what was the closing price for BHP shares on the 30th of June 2020? You'll notice I'm not telling it what country BHP is in or anything like that. See what it comes back with. And it thinks that I am asking this based on the previous conversation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new conversation. I'm going to use Claude 3 Opus again. And in this new conversation, I'm going to ask the same question. By starting a new conversation, it's not going to take into account the recent chat that we've just had. It's going to start with a blank sheet of paper, and it says it doesn't have access to real-time or historical stock market data. So that's a bit disappointing. I'm going to try a different bot. I'm going to try GPT-4, and we'll see how that goes. If it goes any better. And once again, GPT-4 said that it can't access closing share prices. So that's a bit disappointing. We can't get that information. And so we'll just have to move on to something else. And as I said earlier, not everything works exactly the way that you want. And I'm trying to give you a couple of examples of where things don't work. But in the vast majority of cases, it is going to work. Okay, what we're going to do next is some transaction analysis. So I'm going to upload a file with my, I want to go back into Claude. I find Claude's the best for financial analysis. So I want to upload a file with a whole lot of invoices that have been, all my credit card transactions. Let me just find the file. A whole lot of credit card transactions on my business credit card over the last 2 years. In fact, every credit card transaction. And so you'll now be able to see what I spend my money on. And I'm asking, what are the services where I pay a monthly subscription? Maybe I want to do this because I'm worried a couple of my subscriptions have dropped off. Or maybe you just keep paying these subscriptions and I want to do an audit and check that I'm not paying for anything that I don't need anymore. So here's a list of all my subscriptions, and I can now very quickly go through that and say, oh yes, I want all of those, or maybe this one here, which is perhaps Google Ads. I forgot that I was still paying for that and I don't want to pay for Google Ads anymore. So without having to trawl through hundreds and hundreds of credit card transactions, I can just get a really nice summary. Now I'm going to ask the next question. Are there any subscriptions that I have stopped in the last 2 years? And this is one where perhaps I'm worried that when my credit card expired and I changed over to a new one, to a new credit card, I may have inadvertently not renewed all of my subscriptions. So it's going to tell me if there are any credit card subscriptions that I've stopped during that period of time. So there's another use case as well. It won't get this 100% right. It's referring to a few one-time charges, and that's okay, but at least it's giving me some summarized information to check rather than having to go through and check every single transaction in my credit card file. So there's a whole lot of use cases. I won't say of GPT-4 because I've been using Claude, which is an alternative to GPT-4, but a whole lot of use cases of Claude in relation to financial analysis, and there's a whole lot more that we could have done as well, as you saw in that brainstorming exercise in the beginning. What I want to do now is I want to move into Excel and I want to show you a tool that's called Copilot. So Copilot is a Microsoft tool. It's based on GPT-4. You do need a Copilot subscription, which is separate to a Pro subscription. So it's an additional subscription, and the cost of that subscription really depends on what version of Excel or what version of Microsoft 365 you have. So best to look that up rather than for me to tell you what that's going to cost, because it will vary from business to business. And Copilot works within Excel, it works within Word, PowerPoint, Outlook. So you could use it in Word, for example, to write material. We're going to talk about writing a little bit later, but what I'm going to show you now is how Copilot works within Excel. And at this point in time, in order for Copilot to work, you need to have your data in a table. I know this looks like a table, but Excel doesn't define this as a table. I'll show you how to make it a table in a minute. You need to have your file saved in a Microsoft server such as OneDrive as an example, and you need to have the Copilot subscription. And if you have the Copilot subscription, you'll see that Copilot appears up in the corner here, the icon. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn on Copilot by clicking on that icon. It takes a minute to come up, and it says I only work in an Excel table. And as soon as I click on the table, now it recognizes that this is a table. And so we're going to ask a question or two. What I have in this table, and this is data that I prepared earlier, imagine that we're a stationery company. We have a list of all our products in column A, who the customer is in column C, and then corresponding to that, who's the salesperson in column B. And then we have our sales from 2022 and 2023. And we're going to ask this question: create a new column called growth, comparing 2023 sales with 2022 sales. So I'm not saying compare column D with column E. I'm giving this instruction in English, and Copilot is going to go and create this new column, which is going to be, with a bit of luck, column F. Let's wait and see. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. Just taking a little bit of time, a little bit longer than normal. And here we go. So it's told us what the formula is. And if I click here, I've just hovered at the moment over the insert column, and it's showed us the growth for each row. And if I click, it creates that column permanently. So now we have an extra column in our table. I didn't have to put in any formulas, you will have noticed. Now we're going to ask it to color code the growth column based on the level of growth. So I haven't given it instructions on what colors to use or how to do that color coding, but it's very smart. And what it's going to work out is that for the area with the highest growth, it'll use a darker shade of green, and all the way through to a lighter shade of green for lower, slightly lower growth. And then if the growth is really low, you'll have a dark shade of red, and if it's a little bit more than that, a lighter shade of red. So now we can see for each combination of product and customer where the highest growth was and where the lowest growth, and the colours help us identify that really well. But I'd like to be able to see it even more clearly. So what I want to do now is I want to sort that data. So we're going to ask it to sort the growth column from highest to lowest. So now we're taking that column and we're just sorting it. So I'd expect we're going to see all the dark green up the top, and all the reds down the bottom. That's exactly what we've got. So we can see which products and which customers had the highest growth. We had printers where Fred was the salesperson, seemed to have done really well. And printers where Wilma was the salesperson seemed to have done really badly. In fact, if you look at this, Wilma's really not doing very well at all. We've got lots of reds next to Wilma, a few here in the middle with some mixes of Fred and Wilma, and Fred's done really well. So off the back of this, maybe we need a bit of a conversation with Wilma about her performance, and perhaps it's time to reward Fred for his strong performance. So Copilot came up with all of those different formulas and sorting and color codings. I didn't have to know very much about Excel in order to do that. Of course, everything I just did, you could have done yourself using a more traditional approach in Excel, such as conditional formatting or sorting, formulas. Personally, I actually prefer the old-fashioned method. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, but many of you will prefer the Copilot method. So that's something that you might just want to play around with. I'm just going to do one more thing here. I'm going to ask Copilot to create a pivot table. And what this pivot table is going to do is it's going to take this same data and it's going to present it in a different way. So instead of having a long table with 140 odd rows, it's going to take the same information and summarize it, making it a bit easier to read. So let's wait for it to finish doing that. So here's a draft of the pivot table, and there's a button here to add it to a new sheet. So here we've got a beautiful table that's nicely formatted with some colours. We've got all our products down the side. We've got the customers across the top, and we can see what the sales have been for each product and customer conversation, and then we've got totals down the right and totals across the bottom. And I could format all of this with commas as well now if I want to, or I could probably instruct Copilot to do that for us. I'm not going to in the interest of time because I think you've got the gist of what we're doing here. So that's a little bit on Copilot working with Excel. Now we're going to head back to Poe, and now I want to use GPT-4. We're going to do some marketing work now because I know you all want more clients in your business, and you'll all say that you don't have the time to do marketing as much as you would like to. So GPT-4 and Claude and other generative AI tools are really good for marketing. So let's try this. Design a marketing campaign for an Australian accountant who wants to use the instant asset write-off to attract new plumber clients. The title, Flush Away Tax Worries. Notice how it's used the word flush, picking up that we're targeting plumbers here, so it's really clever in the way it does that. It's telling us who's our audience, the duration of the campaign, what's the key message, what are our different channels. We've got digital, social media, email, content marketing, direct mail, partnerships, webinars, workshops. So lots of channels there. And then what are our different promotional tactics going to be? We're going to make a lead magnet, such as an ebook, perhaps a consultation, a referral program. We might have a logo, a tagline, some imagery. How much budget are we going to allocate to each? How are we measuring success? The timetable. So this is a really, really good marketing plan that we've just put together with one question in the space of about 30 seconds. Once again, I'm really, really impressed with that. And we can go back in and tweak that, but it's a great starting point for us. So what we want to do now is we want to explain how does this instant asset write-off work, and how would it apply to a plumber who buys a new ute. And so GPT-4 is now explaining exactly how it works, how it applies to a plumber. So it's doing what we did. You've got to check the eligibility. There's a cost threshold, which is really important. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. Once again, I didn't give a lot of detail here, and it's providing a really good description. You may want to tweak that a little bit if you were to send it to your client, but it's a great starting point. And we've got a simplified example as well, because examples are always good in explaining something. Now, suppose your plumber clients aren't that bright. Let's explain it to a 10-year-old in 100 words or less. Imagine you're saving up your allowance to buy a really cool bike to do your paper route faster. So it's putting this in terms that a 10-year-old would understand. And it says, the government says that if you buy the bike, you can keep more of your allowance this year instead of giving some to them. So it's put it in terms that a 10-year-old would understand. Once again, I think it's really clever. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to write a newsletter article that we can put in our newsletter, and perhaps we can include it in our blog post as well, which is aimed at plumbers, explaining the instant asset write-off. So this is the article. Once again, what is it? How does it benefit you? Navigating the nuts and bolts. It's used this nuts and bolts terminology, which is really relevant to plumbers. It's given a real life scenario. Don't go down the drain with taxes, another heading that's relevant to plumbers. So we've got a great article there, which is an excellent starting point. We could ask it to write an ebook for us, which will be similar to the article, just much longer. Now let's suppose we do have an ebook and we use that as a lead magnet, which means we put it on our website and plumbers can come along and download the ebook. What we want to do is we want to send an email to those plumbers over the next couple of weeks. We want to send multiple emails to them to remind them of the ebook and remind them that we exist, and try and push them a little bit further along the journey of wanting to talk to us. So we're asking to compose a 5-part email drip sequence. There's a little bit of a pun here on the drip with the plumber, but that was not deliberate. It just turned out that way. That's what these emails are called. They're called drip sequences. So you can see there's a plan for email 1. We've got a heading, a subject, and the first one's just an introduction. The second one provides some tips. The third one is some success stories that we've had perhaps with other clients. The fourth one is an offer for a free consultation. So you can see how we're leading them along this journey here. And the fifth one is a last chance reminder, which says, we haven't heard from you. If we don't hear from you soon, then we're going to stop bothering you. This is your last opportunity to take advantage of our offer. So very, very clever the way it leads the plumber through this process. And remember, I only gave it a 1-line brief, which was just draft a series of 5 emails. It knew exactly what to do. And I dare say it's written that drip sequence much better than I would have done. I'm not a marketer, but much better than I would have done, and probably much better than 95% of people who participated in our webinar as well. And that's with no disrespect to any of the accountants in the audience. Okay, we're going to move to something slightly different now. Instead of getting GPT-4 to just write from scratch, we're going to use it to provide a summary of the Australian federal budget. And I've realised that I didn't put the link, but that's okay because it looks like GPT-4 has gone and found the budget, and it's pulled out all the bits that are relevant to the budget there. Just in case it wasn't able to find it, I could have given it a link to the website where the budget material was, but it managed to find that information itself. It says, so let's, and I could ask what measures are relevant to superannuation or any other topics as well. But it comes up with really tailored material. Now, I know a lot of you subscribe to services where you can send out a budget summary to your clients. But imagine if you didn't have that, that on budget night, the papers come out, you run GPT-4 over the budget, and within an hour of the budget coming out, you've got a beautiful summary that you can send to all of your clients. Once again, I do suggest that you check what's written, but you could get that out really, really quickly, and I'm sure they'll be impressed. Okay. We're now going to run a technical query. So we're coming back to the plumber and the ute. I'm an accountant. My client, who is a plumber, just bought a new ute for $100,000. Can he use the instant asset write-off? Now, you'll remember that GPT-4 doesn't know what the threshold is, and that's because it was trained on data up until April 2023. That's about a year ago. It's conscious that these thresholds can go up and down, and so it has to be a little bit cautious before it gives you a definitive answer, because it doesn't know what the threshold is at the moment. So I'm going to now say, suppose the threshold is 70,000. What are the implications for my client? Remember, they bought this ute for $100,000. So it says the ute's purchase price exceeds the threshold. Therefore, the ute wouldn't qualify for an immediate full deduction. It uses the word full, so it identifies there might be a partial reduction, but not a full deduction. It talks about some other implications and steps your client may need to consider. So it doesn't just give us the factual answer, it goes above and beyond, tells us a whole lot of other considerations that we can consider. And I think that's a pretty good answer. So, I have a problem. Because when I explained the instant asset write-off to my client, he didn't hear me explain this threshold. He says I didn't explain it at all. I think I did explain it, but he just wasn't listening. So I'm asking GPT-4 to write a letter that we can send to the client. I understand that there has been some confusion some confusion regarding the instant asset write-off eligibility. I'd like to extend my sincerest apologies for the misunderstanding. Okay, and then we go on to explain what it is and how it works and what the options are. I'm offering a meeting to discuss the depreciation schedule. So I think that's a really well-worded email. Of course, you may not send an email, you may pick up the phone, but if you did want to send an email and you weren't sure of how to draft it, GPT-4 does a really, really good job of drafting it with a nice, friendly, but professional tone. Now, suppose you've heard that the government is considering removing the instant asset write-off, and that's not going to be good for your plumber clients. And you want to demonstrate to them that you're on the front foot. So you want to send a submission to the government on why this is going to harm the plumbing industry. So instead of writing the submission yourself, just get GPT-4 to do it for you. So here we go. We've got an introduction, a background, why it's important to the plumbing industry, and this goes on and on. So this is just another use case for you. I would say whenever you've got anything you want to write, GPT-4 is just a fantastic starting point. We have a recommendation here, the conclusion, and a thank you at the end, and then signing off. And then it even tells you, please adjust the details to match the specific context. What I want to do now is I want to show you a tool called Tax Genie, which is prepared by a business called Lodgit, and the owner and founder of Lodgit is Andrew Noble. He's part of our community here at Lime Actuarial. And this is a tool where you can ask it some tax-related questions and it will give you an answer. And it even has a list down here of all the questions that other people have asked in the past. So I'm just going to repeat the question that was asked here. I'm just going to click on it again, scroll up to the top. In 2 sentences, explain the difference between revised fixed rate method and the actual method for claiming a deduction for home office expenses. And here we go. The revised fixed rate method allows taxpayers to claim 67 cents per hour, while the actual cost method requires detailed record keeping. So I think that's pretty good. I've just typed in a question and the tool comes up with an answer, which I assume is the correct answer. Those of you that are accountants will know that it is. So that's another tool that might be of interest to you. And you can see up here the URL taxgenie, GENII.logit.net.au, or I'm sure if you do a Google search on TaxGenie, which is over here where my cursor is, that will come up as well. So there's another tool that you might want to use. And the key point here is that apart from your standard Claude and GPT-4, there are thousands of tools out there that are designed for a particular purpose, that have been trained for carrying out very, very specific tasks, and TaxGenie is just one of those. So often you might want to quote a particular person to support your argument somewhere, but you don't know who has a certain view. So let's ask, the Australian government is considering the removal of franking credits. Let's just go back to Poe. What is Paul Keating's opinion on this topic? Because before quoting him, I want to make sure that I understand. Paul Keating, the former Prime Minister of Australia, has expressed opinions on franking credits. It's important to note that opinions can evolve. Keating has been critical, I'm just reading here, Keating has been critical of the cash refund aspect of the system. So there you go, it knows what his views are. What would John Hewson's opinion be in relation to increasing the rate of GST? You might remember that John Hewson was a former leader of the Liberal Party, and this was before the GST came in. He wanted to introduce a GST which would have been 15%. He's provided his opinion on various economic policies, including the GST. However, without direct recent statements from John Hewson himself, I can only refer to his past public commentary. And Hewson has spoken about the need for a comprehensive tax reform, suggesting the tax system should be more efficient, fair. Regarding the increase specifically, while I do not have updated comments, it is plausible that he might support the discussion on the GST rate if it were part of a broader strategy to reform the tax system. So they're really honing in on what he said, what he hasn't said, when he said it. What would Bob Brown's opinion be? So Bob Brown was the leader of the Greens Party, so we're getting different perspective. He has held views. The Australian Greens have often been cautious about regressive tax systems like the GST, so he's not in favour. So who are some advocates for increasing the GST? If we can't quote Bob Brown and John Hewson's a bit out of date, who are some advocates? And these are people perhaps we can quote: economists and think tanks, business groups, political figures. We're not really getting, we're getting very generic comments here, generic categories, but not individuals. I could dig deeper into these and I'm sure it would come up with examples for me. I'm not going to do that now, just in the interest of time. But I'm sure that if I dug deeper and said, tell me some economists that are in favour of of increasing the GST, then we would get that exact response. Okay. Now we want to move on to some writing feedback. So this is our scenario that we're going to enter. I just caught up with a friend, John Smith. He mentioned that a friend of his, Michael, is currently looking for a new accountant to manage his SMSF. I have drafted the below email to Michael. Please provide feedback. Hi, Michael. I just caught up with our mutual friend, John Smith. John told me you were looking for a new accountant. As it turns out, I am Australia's leading SMSF accountant, the one, the only, the best, numero uno. I know the Tax Act backwards and I can recite the SIS Act while standing on one leg. And then we've got a whole lot of abbreviations, NCCs, NALI, ABPs, TRISs and so on. I know them all. As you can probably tell, I'm your man. Let's meet in my office at 3 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. And we're asking for some feedback here. Your draft email is enthusiastic and confident, which can be appealing. So this is really nicely worded because they don't want to offend me, but it may come across as overly assertive and presumptive and perhaps arrogant. It's important to maintain a professional tone and offer the recipient some flexibility. And here's a revised version. And you can see it's a much softer version that they are coming up with, which is far more likely to get Michael on board than the version that I drafted. So if anybody ever needs anybody to draft an email, a nice softly written email, don't ask me. Not that I would write one like that in the first place. Okay. Now, we can ask for lots of different tones in emails. So we've got this, but let's suppose we've heard that Michael is a very formal person. So we're going to write it, the same email, in a formal tone. Now, I'm not sure that you'd write it like this either, but at least you can see the formality. And if ever you get a response that you don't like, you just go back and you say, please write this with a formal tone again, but less arrogant. And it will come back and it will be formal, but this time it won't come across as being arrogant, hopefully. I still feel it's perhaps a little bit arrogant, but you can keep digging in and giving it more and more instructions. Now we're going to write with a Shakespearean style. Of course, you'd never do this, but I just want to show you how you can take any style, pick any famous person that has a particular style to them, and you can incorporate that style into your writing. Upon recent discourse with our mutual companion, the goody John Smith, it hath been brought to mine attention that thou art in pursuit of a sage to tend to thy self-managed superannuation fund, an endeavour most grave and noble. So nobody apart from Shakespeare that I've come across would have written like that, and I dare say I recommend that you don't either. Okay, how do we go with legal advice? Well, let's try this. I'm an accountant taking on a new client. I'll be providing tax advice. My existing client agreement is silent on liability. Can you please draft a suitable liability clause? And here it goes. So it's drafting a clause. Now you may feel, oh, this isn't good enough for me. I want to use a lawyer. and that might cost you a couple of $1,000s or more. You might also feel, the risk here is pretty low. So you wouldn't do this for your client, but you might do it for yourself and say, the risk's pretty low. I'm happy to accept this risk. I'd rather accept this risk in this situation than pay a lawyer $2,000 or $3,000 or more. Note the disclaimer at the end. This is a general draft, and the applicability and enforceability can vary by jurisdiction and specific circumstances. So they're giving you the disclaimer there at the end. Based on this clause, will I be liable if I make an inadvertent error? So you're now asking it to interpret the clause that it has just written. This typically means that if you make an inadvertent error in the course of providing your services, your liability will be capped at the amount the client paid for those specific services. So that's good. So we've got some limits on our liability. I feel more comfortable with that now that I know how it works when I make an inadvertent error. We're now going to have a look at some general knowledge. You should all know the answer to this one. Which actuarial business owned by Greg Einfeld, that's me, provides fast, easy SMSF actuarial certificates for only $100 plus GST? So here we go. The actuarial business owned by Greg Einfeld that provides SMSF actuarial certificates for a competitive price is Lime Actuarial. So thank you GPT-4 for getting that one right, and that's correct. That's what we do at Lime Actuarial. We provide actuarial certificates that are fast and easy. We charge only $100 plus GST, and if you have any queries, you're always welcome to call us up, and you get to speak to the business owner, you get to speak to the actuary, and that's me. And for our clients, thank you very much for your support, and I think they will all vouch for our service. And for those of you that are not clients, well, we love to work with you as well. So what I'd suggest you do is go online, try us out next time you need an actuarial certificate. We're integrated with Class Super, we're integrated with BGL, and we've got other integrations in the pipeline as well. And we'd love to be able to help you out. You'll see how easy and fast the service is, and if you're like any of our other clients, you'll never look back. So thank you very much. That's all the content that I was going to share today. I mentioned that we ran the webinar yesterday and we had some questions. We got a lot of questions about privacy and confidentiality of data. So I will reiterate what I said earlier, and that is that you should be careful putting any confidential data into AI tools, because you just never know how your data is being used to train their models, and you're much better off trying to anonymize the data before you put it in, if possible. I got a question about whether you can analyze data that's sitting in your cloud accounting system, such as Class Super, BGL 360, Xero, and so on. As far as I'm aware at the moment, you would need to extract that data first. You can do so using PDF reports. There may be an API whereby you can extract the data, or maybe you can download some Excel or CSV files. And then once you've got the extracted data, you can feed that into GPT-4, or you can feed it into Poe and use any of the apps that we've used today, or any of the other apps that are available as well. Another question that we got was just around the cost, so I'll just run through that again. Poe, if you like the look of Poe, it costs 300 Australian dollars per year, and it gives you access to GPT-4, to Claude, and to a whole lot of other tools that I didn't use today as well, and there's more and more that are coming online all the time. You can get a subscription directly with OpenAI, which is the company that provides GPT-4 and Chat-GPT. The cost is about the same, and that's why I prefer Poe, because it gives you that additional variety. But play around with both, see which one you like best, which interface you like best, and so on, and then you can take it from there. If you have any other questions, then feel free to get in touch. Our contact details are on the Lyme Actuarial website. Feel free to get in touch, and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions that you have in relation to what we've discussed today. Thanks very much.